I am Dave the Amateur Magus. On this channel I talk all about the mechanics behind ceremonial magic, occultism, esotericism, and the mechanics behind everything you can find within a dusty old grimoire. Today we're going to kind of be doing a little bit of a continuation of last week. Last week, of course, I talked about Benjamin Rowe's scrying guide and scrying more specifically in general. This week, we're going to be talking about pathworking. Pathworking is a specific type of scrying, in my opinion, and this is going to be very familiar to people who have ever attempted to scry the Tree of Life in order to get meditations upon it, or have scryed the tattvas of the Golden Dawn. Now, I'm just going to say that there is no one-size-fits-all to what you should be seeing or what you should experience during pathworking. And I'm just going to give this because my experiences during pathworking, which I'm not going to share too many of here, and your experiences of pathworking are going to be, if all is going according to plan in the universe, completely different, and that's a good thing. Just because you're scrying the Enochian Aethers does not mean you're going to have the exact same experience as one Mr. Aleister Crowley. Likewise, just because you're having an experience does not mean that it's not supposed to line up with people. I know people who have tried doing pathworking and then they end up having, they end up going through and having a momentary experience where they're interacting with a spirit and then it completely changes their life. I've seen this happen on multiple occasions. But the thing is, just because you have a life-changing experience doesn't mean everyone else is, and vice versa. Sometimes people will have life-changing experiences and you will be hearing about it, or they will share their experience and then you will read it and you will hear it some way and you read it and you're like, wow, that's fucking crazy. That's crazy. And then you go about your day because it wasn't your experience. But for that person, that entire situation that they experienced is in their head, fresh, and they can vividly recall it. And it changed their spiritual life. Ideally for the better. Sometimes the worse. Depends on the path. Now, the word pathworking actually comes from this practice being applied to the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, where there are various spheres and there are various paths along the Tree of Life. This is where the term pathworking comes from, and recently people have decided that they want to use this to, this now refers to just kind of visual journeying in a scry, either mentally or astrally. That's what I mean. But as long as you're working and you are trying to advance your spiritual path, I'm going to consider that to be pathworking. Though it does primarily start with the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, so we should probably touch on that. The Kabbalistic Tree of Life is going to be the cornerstone of pathworking for a lot of the Western ceremonial world. And I would say that there's nothing wrong with just doing some Kabbalistic pathworking. I would say, however, you will notice that over time, if you are doing Kabbalistic pathworking, some paths will be easier to traverse than others. Likewise, if you're doing the tattvas, which is also from the Golden Dawn system, that they just stole the name of from yogas, I believe. I believe they stole that from Hinduism at some point. So, the tattvas of the Golden Dawn are going to be easier for some people to navigate than others, and the reason for this is because everyone is unique, which is the lukewarm take of the century. Everyone is different from everyone else, and unless we live in a truly infinite universe where people start getting copied according to science, we're not going to experience people getting a one-for-one copy anytime soon. But that is important when it comes to spirituality, because when we are using our mystical abilities to do some pathworking up the Tree of Life, which is God's blueprint for how they decided to make the universe, our interactions with those things are going to be different from necessarily other people's. You can have an experience where you have this experience where it's very clear, it's very transparent about what it's trying to tell you. You end up talking to some entities, and those entities tell you exactly what you need to know, and you end up hating it, because if an entity tells you what you need to know, 9 times out of 10 you're going to hate it. No offense to the people who end up getting what they like out of spirits, but a large portion of the time you're going to be told things you don't want to hear, and it's actually one of the kind of telltale signs that you're getting either an eluder spirit or something you should not trust if you get something that you kind of expected to hear. Generally speaking. Sometimes if the answer is 2 plus 2 and they tell you 4, that's one thing. But if they tell you, yeah, you're doing great, you're amazing, and you're in the sphere associated with Saturn and restrictions, something's off about that vision. And that's just kind of ego boosting. Which brings us to another topic that I should mention. Just because you're having an experience doesn't mean you can't vet them. Now, there's going to be some systems where you can't do this, but a large portion of these systems you can. And what I mean by vet your visions is that on occasion when you're going through and when you're doing a pathworking, scrying meditation, you will end up seeing things that will line up with what you're supposed to be seeing and things that don't line up with what you're seeing in a drastic way. And what I mean by that is when you're seeing something, let's say you're doing the elemental scrying of the tattvas and you're trying to work through the elements and get a better understanding of that system. Well, if you go to the elemental plane of water and everything's on fire, or everything is a mountain and you're in a desert, I would say that no, you absolutely did not go to the elemental plane of water if you go to somewhere where it's just mountains, deserts, on fire, and there is not a single drop of water in the entire plane. Now, this is of course, an extreme example, but you're going to be seeing things like, if you see a bunch of rocks or like crystals, that might mean that maybe you didn't go to the elemental plane of water. But if you end up on a beach, that's pretty watery. I mean, people think of watery things all the time. If you see a bunch of crabs, maybe some fish, and it is of course going to depend on what you think of as watery. If you see a bunch of watery stuff around, that is, you had an experience where this one particular thing reminds you a lot of water, you might see that thing around. Maybe you see fountains, maybe you see all that kind of stuff. But overall, you're going to have a generalized impression of what a watery place should look like. And if it doesn't fit that mold, there's a high possibility that you're getting something completely different, or you're just having an issue with that particular session, and maybe you were listening to things that were like just hardcore mountain mining music for 3 hours, and you've just listened to exclusively hardcore mountain mining music and dwarven metal for the last 3 hours, and you're trying to do an area water scrying. Well, I would say that that's probably going to color your perception of your scrying session. And now, if you had done that before you do the elemental plane of earth, maybe you go and, you listen to your hardcore mining music before you scry the elemental plane of earth, and you see a bunch of dwarves around, and you see a bunch of gnomes who look like dwarves and a Snow White. Yeah, maybe that actually makes a lot more sense. It's all about what you go into the scrying session with and how you are approaching it. Now, the reason I bring this up is because sometimes, and this happens to me a lot, sometimes you will go in completely blind, and you will get completely blindsided with a particular set of symbolism, a particular set of experiences, sensations, and you end up seeing things that you were completely not expecting. I personally find that those are useful if, when you go after your blind pathworking session, you go ahead and you're like, okay, let me take a look at the correspondences of what I should have seen, and you trace it back, and then you find out that, yes, it is in fact that. Or you put it through that lens of what the path is supposed to be, and then you understand, like, yeah, that does check out in a weird way. That does make sense as to what I'm supposed to be seeing. I'll give an example. Most people, when they're doing pathworking, are going to scry the paths of the Tree of Life, if you're using that system. Well, the first path you're supposed to scry in that system is the Path of Tau, or the Path of the World card. Now, the Path of the World card has a lot of correspondences to it. it's got a lot of correspondences. And so if you go through blind, right, you think to yourself, okay, so what is this path supposed to be? And if you go through and you scry that path, maybe you see tunnels. Maybe you see weird stuff on the other side. Like you walk in and the world is just normal, and you walk through and you're going through a cave system. Well, that path corresponds to Saturn and the element of Earth. So going through cave systems would make sense, but it doesn't really fit the world card. And then you end up experiencing the world as she is presented on the world card, and she decides whether or not you are able to go through and experience the grander scale. And then you get on the other side and everything turns purple, right? This is all symbolic. This isn't literal. You're not going to literally start meditating and walking through caves. You're going to be in the same place, but mentally and spiritually, you are transporting to another place. And in case you're wondering, why would it be a cave? We already discussed that. You might be wondering, why am I seeing... Isn't Saturn supposed to be the restrictive one? Why would I be judged by the world card? Well, the reason why is because, and this is the free pathworking advice you get for the day, you have to go through the path of Tau in order to basically be initiated into the pathworking system of Kabbalah, is my understanding, because all pathworking, regardless of what you're doing, happens in Yesod. In order to pathwork properly, you need to start with the path of Tau in order to go through, so you can get those proper symbolism and that proper symbolic representation given to you in your visions and in your pathworking sessions. Now, another example, and this is an example from a buddy of mine, if you go to the path of Shin, some sources will claim that that is the source of human ingenuity and technology. If you recall back to the Garden of Eden story, the serpent tempted Eve by saying that they would become like gods, right? Well, the path of Shin is the path by which mankind does that and adds their intellect and adds their mercurial faculties from the sphere of Hod, and those descend down into the physical world. It is the fiery ideas path and technological innovation, at least depending on the sources you're looking for. Now, what ended up happening was, when I did this, I ended up going through in this very steampunk, very cybernetic and digital world that was becoming more and more refined as I got through the path, and then everything turned orange as I was walking through the path. And slight aside, when I say it turned orange, the reason why is because when you are working through Kabbalistic paths, you are going from one sphere to the next sphere. And this is most easily demonstrated to you that you have exited to the next sphere by just the world changing colors to the corresponding colors of that world that you are going to. Now, I don't really scry the Kabbalistic spheres that much, but I know that some people do, and I'm just expressing how I know that I have no longer walking the path and I am actually in the sphere. That's generally how it flashes into my awareness that I am now entering the sphere of Hod. It doesn't show up like a road sign. Sometimes it does, but usually not. It depends on the sphere. But back to the paths, you can usually go research what the path is supposed to be in your particular system of initiation. In the Golden Dawn system, I know the path of Shin is the path of human innovation, but in other traditions it might be different. I know it's different in a lot of other traditions. Really, the only sphere that is the same across all Kabbalistic traditions, one-to-one in every tradition, is going to be Mars, because in every tradition, in every system, Mars is the red planet of destruction. And that has to do with color theory, and at some point I'll get the color theory video out. But for references on what the Kabbalistic spheres are going to be in the Hermetic system, I highly recommend For the actual Kabbalistic spheres themselves, Dion Fortune's The Mystical Kabbalah, I'm just going to give a disclaimer warning that this book is very old and it is very Victorian England, so I would take that with a bit of a heaping. Go to your local farm supply store, buy a salt lick, and take some of the more spicy takes that she has in this book with that lick of salt that you just bought. Should be about a 20-pound block of salt you buy if you do this. You will need every ounce of that 20 pounds, I can assure you. Now, the other one for the actual paths is going to be Gareth Knight, and he is going to have the practical guide to Kabbalistic symbolism. I believe it's part 2 that is just entirely dedicated to the paths. This one still has admittedly some pretty bad takes in it, but I will say that Gareth Knight's takes are at least not nearly as noticeably bad as some of Dion Fortune's work, but both of those do come from the parts of the Golden Dawn and that kind of era where it was more theosophy inspired, and that in and of itself kind of leaves them to be more new agey than you would get from, say, this channel, or more what I call hardcore ceremonial magicians, like, the Pokerunion stuff, the Golden Dawn stuff you get on this channel, Agrippa, that kind of thing. And lastly, I wanted to just touch on the various things you could pathwork through. In the Western system, the 3 major things are going to be the Tree of Life, obviously, the planetary powers, obviously, and the elements that I've mentioned a couple times here. The reason why you would want to do that is because sometimes it's better and easier to just go talk to, say, the elemental kings when you're working through the elements instead of trying to evoke the elemental kings. I personally have better luck talking to the elemental kings when you're going through and you go and scry the elemental plane that they rule over, because they're already there. They have a big castle usually, and you really can't miss it. And the one time when I had an issue finding the castle, I literally went to one of the natives and asked for directions, and they were like, oh, it's right over there, and then suddenly the castle appeared, which was a very interesting experience that only can really happen when you are doing a pathworking / scrying situation. So yeah, I have been Dave, the Amateur Magus. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and share it around with people you think might enjoy it. If you really enjoyed this video, consider subscribing down in the Patreon link down in the description. And if you are already watching this on Patreon, thank you for your continued and ongoing support. Link to the community Discord is in the description. I have been Dave, the Amateur Magus. Hope you're having a good day. If you're not having a good day, hope your day gets better. Take it easy.